Hi, everyone, and welcome to every episode of VeggieTales Reviewed. I'm that media guy, and I'm here to answer your questions about the quality of talking Christian vegetable television. Today, we have the subject of
Episode 13 King George and the Ducky. The first episode of the new millennium and the first episode to use upgraded animation software. Bye bye, Lumpy. Hello, Maya. And what upgrades does Maya bring? Honestly, I couldn't tell you because I don't know anything about animation software. I'm guessing that the upgrade from Softimage to Maya is comparable to the upgrade from Adobe Flash to Toon Boom? Really, the most notable difference from a viewer's perspective is the new character models, and I didn't even notice this change as a kid. Heck, even as an adult, I am struggling to pinpoint the exact changes made to them. I think that their faces are smaller in proportion to the rest of their bodies, and they might be sporting more realistic textures, but honestly, I can't say much beyond that they simply look different. It's something that you'll simply have to notice and judge for yourself, and I simply cannot say if this change is better or worse than what came before. I personally prefer the older models, but I'm sure that that's just nostalgia, and these new ones don't take away from the quality of the episode. I guess, since I am talking about the animation, I will mention the goof where Larry is shown in his towel after we see him changing behind a screen after his bath. There must have been some embarrassment at Big Idea after that, but I don't think that it affects the quality of the episode at all. It's just something interesting to point out. Ron Smith was the one behind that mistake, and the company would let him help develop and voice one of the main characters in their upcoming series, 321 Penguins, so I think everything worked out for everyone in the end. Well, at least until the company came crashing down into bankruptcy, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We have an episode that we need to review, and we have to start with the countertop scenes. After the last couple of episodes didn't have any, they have come back in full force here, and I couldn't be happier with how they turned out. Enter Jimmy and Jerry Gord, wearing very cheap and poorly designed Bob and Larry costumes so that they can commandeer the episode. They even have a story to tell, with the Englishman who went up a hill and came down with all the bananas. The simplest way that I can describe this story is to say that this is the VeggieTales version of the Ugly Barnacle story. It is so simple, yet so absolutely brilliant and utterly hilarious that it is a true work of art. Honestly, if you swap the Englishman and Swede with your two favorite politicians and replace the fruit with wealth, you have a piece that might actually be more funny now than it was when it was first made. In fact, dare I even say it, but this might even be more effective at teaching the message of not being selfish than the main story, at least for the adults in the audience. And that's really interesting considering that the main story is, well, I guess I should get the elephant out of the room. The story of King George and the Ducky is, in fact, an adaptation of the story of David and Bathsheba. You might not be familiar with this story, since your teachers probably didn't want to read the story to you in your second grade Sunday school class, so in case you aren't aware, in the Bible, King David has everything that he could ever want except for Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. In a moment of abject selfishness, he sends Uriah out to the front lines of battle so that he will most certainly die and Bathsheba can become David's own. Yeah, the story is a bit messed up, to say the least. Big Idea changes up this story so that George, played by Larry, doesn't want someone else's wife, but instead wants Junior's rubber ducky, despite him having an entire wardrobe full of the yellow plastic bath toys. And, unlike Josh and the Big Wall, this episode isn't going to tell you if this story is historically accurate and where you can look up the original tale. Oh, and the war in this story is a great pie war. Yep, in this story, soldiers don't get shelled, but creamed. Not that guns existed back in biblical times, but you get what I'm saying. In this version, Thomas, the name of Junior's character, survives his time on the desert-laden battlefield, but he still suffers PTSD from his experience, leaving him thoroughly scarred through the self-centered actions of the king. You really gotta hand it to Phil Vischer for changing the tale of David and Bathsheba to make it appropriate for all ages without it affecting the themes of the overall story. Although, during the ending countertop, Bob states that King George gave his duckies to anyone in his kingdom who wanted one after the events of the story. Now, obviously, the writers weren't going to kill Larry the Cucumber's kid, but if the duckies are supposed to be substitutes for trophies, then him giving them away is just really... I don't even want to think about it. This line from Bob was completely unnecessary and just brings up more questions than answers for the biblically literate. But regardless, I think that this episode works as an adaptation of the source material overall. But does it work as an entertaining story? Well, I think I should start out by noting that this is the first episode where the antagonist is none other than Larry the Cucumber. I know that I said in my End of Silliness review that Larry does not work for me when he is not playing the happy-go-lucky character, but in this case, I think that making him the heavily misguided ruler was the right choice for this story. After all, Larry's silly nature can often come across as childlike, and children are the ones that are most likely to overtly display extreme selfishness. And yeah, I'm sure that some of you are thinking of Caillou when I say that, and understandably so, but I really don't want to talk about that show any more than I already have, especially since King George is much more fun to watch than Bald and Bratty. For one thing, King George has 3 songs to sing, and, surprise of all surprises, they are all really good. I'm honestly finding it hard to talk about what makes VeggieTales songs so special without repeating myself, but simply put, I Love My Duck, I Must Have It, and The Selfish Song are all worth a listen. And believe it or not, it's hard to hate a character when you can really beat with their tunes. However, that's not to say that Larry cannot be surprising with just how seemingly malicious he can be at times, but it never gets to the point where he seems outright irredeemable. The old and wise Melvin, played by Paul Grape of course, informing the king of his wrongdoings through his song There Once Was a Man, which is also great, shocker, does present a scenario that changes Larry's heart in a way that feels realistic but is still ultimately satisfying to watch. It's not just Archibald coming out of nowhere to say that silly songs are uncancelled after he himself cancelled them in the previous episode. And it's really heartwarming to see Junior get cleaned up from his cream state, have his beloved Ducky return to him, and have George apologize to Thomas and Lewis. Oh yeah, I haven't even mentioned Lewis yet. Simply put, he is George's reluctant henchman, as portrayed by Bob the Tomato. I can't say that he really has a significant impact on the story. He does try to be the voice of reason, but George refuses to listen, and Melvin is ultimately the one who gets through to him. However, it is interesting how this story is just Bob and Larry and nobody else for a significant portion of the runtime, and it kind of makes those parts reminiscent of the Countertop segments. And hey, those work really well, so this works really well too. And then there's Cedric, played by the head scallion, who does his duty in bringing Thomas to and from the battlefield. That's all that George's favorite general does, but hey, it's nice to have the head scallion finally get a name, even though he will say that he never got one in the silly song a couple of episodes later, but that's neither here nor there. And oh yeah, I guess that's a good segue into the silly song, Endangered Love. This song was quite possibly my favorite as a kid, and I was really disappointed to find out that it was considered to be the least favorite silly song according to the Ultimate Silly Song Countdown. However, as an adult, I am not entirely sure what kid me was thinking. That's not to say that this is a bad song by any means, but I think that this song is hurt by how it largely focuses on 2 characters that we know nothing about. Barbara and Bill are supposed to be representations of characters that you would find on cheesy soap operas, but since we don't actually get to see them, it leaves the silly song feeling a bit lacking. I'd rather have the song focus entirely on Larry and his stuffed manatee as opposed to have the pacing snapped in half by stopping everything to watch Larry watch TV. Even then, though, there's a moment where Larry stops singing in order to dance with the fluffy sea creature, and I think that the episode is trying to make Larry sexy? I don't know, it's just another thing that gives me To Love a Patty vibes, so maybe it actually is better that the song focuses on the characters of the daytime drama? Yeah, the announcer calls the show on TV a daytime drama, but the song takes place in a room that is very dimly lit, presumably because that is a more romantic setting? I don't know, I don't really want to focus on that anymore, especially since I want to stress that this song is not bad by any means. There are some individual components that feel lacking, but it all comes together to produce something that is still very enjoyable, especially since the song does build momentum as it goes on, building to a final bit that is absolutely hilarious and does indeed make VeggieTales feel like an iconic masterpiece. And that is King George and the Ducky, yet another adaptation of a Bible story, and, in fact, the second story to feature David after Dave and the Giant Pickle. Interesting how he transformed from a child asparagus to an adult cucumber, but it does make sense when you consider what David did to Bathsheba in the original story, and I am definitely not going any further than that. But as the first episode of the 2000s, I think that it's actually one of the better episodes of the entire series thus far. First off, everything with Jimmy and Jerry is pure gold. I'm dead serious, that Englishman story is the closest thing to veggie royalty that we've gotten up to this point. That is comedy that delivers to no end. And beyond that, the songs slap once again, and the message really hits home. I'm not kidding when I say that Melvin's song is one of the most dramatic moments of the entire series, which does make sense considering that Nathan's story to David is one of the most powerful moments of the Hebrew scriptures. And to think that talking vegetables were able to achieve something similar with a flannel graph of all things. Yeah, I would actually call this episode certified fresh, believe it or not. While I might prefer some aspects of the animation from the previous decade, the new look does not take away from the incredible substance that VeggieTales has been known to offer. I can understand someone not liking this episode if, say, their name was Hubert, but for me, as long as I have this episode, everything is most definitely Ducky. This has been the 13th episode of every episode of VeggieTales Reviewed, where my goal is to review the entirety of the series designed to let everyone know that God made them special and he loves them very much. Tune in next time to hear me talk about episode 14, Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen. Until then, thank you so much for watching, click the red button to subscribe, and have a fantastic rest of your day doing whatever.